What is up, you heathens and demons, you sinners and saints, beautiful blasphemous bastards? Welcome back to The Rage. You've seen a lot of me today. I've been like all over the internets all day long. And it's going to continue because CJ is here. He's backstage waiting patiently to come in. We are going to have a good conversation. This is not smoky. This is not anything that's going to be, I am hoping anything that is going to have a lot of animosity. But we are going to combat each other. John is going to have some things to bring up. So we're going to get this rolling. What's up, John Peterson?
Yeah, I mean, if you had been looking around YouTube today, you might have started to think that Knock was omnipresent.
Yeah, I've been everywhere.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm happy to speak with CJ. Although I disagree with most of what CJ says, he's usually a pretty reasonable guy. And we kind of went out on Twitter yesterday and we're throwing some insults back and forth to one another. I look at it all as all in fun. It definitely not the acerbic animosity that Smokey wants to throw around. I don't know how many of you that are here now were here an hour ago to see the little short 5 minutes that Knock put out of Triggered Smokey from last night. Or from earlier today, I'm sorry.
This morning.
On Togg's channel. And one comment that he made, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, but essentially Smokey said to Knock, your interpretation of the Bible disagrees with mine, ergo, your entire family is trailer trash. That's essentially what he said, okay? And I always love the battles between different Christians battling on their interpretations of Christianity. It's some of the funniest stuff that I've seen on the YouTubes. And then, you know, speaking of last night, when Smokey got to meet that girl he's sweet on, Jen Aldridge, you know, I just imagine that he spent last night after he was done streaming, laying in bed with Chris DeBerg's Lady in Red playing over and over again, dancing cheek to cheek with the Lady in Red.
I think in that clip I showed, is he stating that she's now his girlfriend?
I mean, yeah, he might be. He just might be. I mean, he's got it bad. He's really got it bad.
And that was just little snippets. That was a 20-minute exchange of Smokey Saint being triggered as fuck.
Well, and I tell you what, I give it a week before Smokey is outside Jen's window with the boombox over his head.
That John Cusack moment.
Yep, blaring out that Lady in Red. Begging for her love. Matter of fact, I just DM'd Jen the Lady in Red off of YouTube and said, hey, this is what Smokey was listening to all last night.
But we're not talking Smokey necessarily. So CJ got caught in the crossfire last night, John.
Yeah.
And CJ's here, and we are going to have a conversation. So I'm going to have my camera off for most of it so I can allow my daughter free reign of the house. But I am doing better. I'm getting most of my color back. I'm almost all the way back to normal. I feel pretty good. Outside of I'm gonna have like COVID symptoms for a couple months, I hear. But what's up, CJ?
I mean, let's face it, though, Knock. You are a white guy. You're like a white guy.
Well, not usually. Usually, I have some really red tint, and it's not. We call ourselves olive skinned, right? So I've been pale, but I'm starting to come back. I'm starting to get back to normal.
Well, so how's it going, guys? I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you're having me here. I got to be honest with you. I didn't actually expect last night to get to the place that it did, but I think a little bit of that has to do just with the place that it was at. So, not to say, I mean, let's be clear, right? I've had good conversations with Smokey and I've had good conversations with you, but every time it seems to be me, you, and Smokey at the same time, it never really seems to go very well.
Well, yeah, me and Smokey are in a war.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Well, and then just considering what you just said, gee, what do you think the thread in that is? So you and him have had good conversations, and you and Smokey have had good conversations, but when the three of you get together, it seems like you and Knock can still, despite last night, you and Knock can still talk reasonable to one another, but Smokey doesn't seem to be able to talk too reasonable with just about anybody that disagrees with him. But that's just my take.
Well, and I will note, I do think.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, CJ.
Well, I was just going to say, I do think, I do freely acknowledge that I think Smokey has a particular dislike for you, Knock. I think that's been made clear, right? Comparatively to other internet atheists. And I mean, I think maybe the only people who I've seen that are equal to that would probably be actually you as well, John Peterson, and maybe, I guess now Jen Aldrich.
Yeah, I mean, and you and Knock have something to talk about here, and then I want to talk to you about a couple of things that we were at odds about, and I think, you and Knock said before the stream, maybe you guys are talking past each other, and that could be the case with you and me too, but, we'll see as it transpires. But I just want to ask you real quick, before you and Knock start your conversation, is what's your take on the pretty ugly shit that Smokey's been saying to Jen Aldridge? I mean, I would imagine you wouldn't talk to any woman that way, CJ.
No, and we've been actually, I don't know if you were aware, we did have this examination thing of Smokey right over on his channel. It was me.
Yeah, I tried to cover it like twice, and then we got sidetracked because Smokey is just the ever-giving present. So I never did actually cover the intervention of Smokey Saint.
Yeah, and in that I kind of laid out basically everything that I feel about the way that Smokey handles things and stuff like that. So he's firmly aware of where I stand. It's one of those things where it's like I don't think that, because I do, and I know this may sound somewhat odd, I understand Smokey quite a bit. In fact, part of the reason that I compared you, John, to Smokey is not actually because I think that you're necessarily serious. I mean, obviously, you still follow me on Twitter. You didn't just go out and rage quit and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? But it's more because of there has been a very long history, and it's only recently changing. And I've spoken with numerous internet atheists who agree with me on this, including, but not limited to, Matthew Steele, and I believe Skylar Fiction, but I can't remember if he was involved in that. But where this has just been constantly heaped our direction, insults and trolling and stuff like that. Pissonthebible.com, all that stuff. You know what I mean? And so, I do understand where somebody like Smokey comes from, where it's like, I'm raging back. I'm done with you. I don't think that's necessarily.
I don't, though.
But
I don't, though. So, Christians do have this persecution complex, and I'm sure, that the mean atheist saying mean things about the religion is offensive. But does that equate to generations of Christians killing atheists, burning people at the stake for practicing witchcraft, or all the ways that they have destroyed other religions, or waged war, or had an iron fist and chokehold on Western society? So I mean, I'm sorry that the Christians don't like the mean atheists saying the mean things about Christianity, but does it even equate to the persecution that Christianity has placed on all others?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that need to be said, though, right? That's somewhat of a loaded topic, and so maybe I'll try to just sort of glance on it a
Yeah,
little
well,
bit.
it is a little topic.
But what I would say is just it's one of those things where you have to understand no Christian alive today is involved in the Crusades or the Inquisitions or anything like that, right? Especially American Christians. I mean, I think you would probably agree that Christianity, and indeed all religion in the West, is predominantly nominal. Fundamentalism is not actually the common thread, right? For the most part, it's Episcopalian, Methodist, people like that, right?
I think I disagree. Like, I mean, when you consider like half of America believes in the YEC, you consider that there are Christians, and I think it's still an ongoing battle in Uganda, pushed by the National Prayer Breakfast. I want to throw in there that they are literally trying to kill the gay people in their country because based upon their Christian rule. Yeah, it's easy to it's easy for me to go to past instances of witchcraft when religion had more power, but there are still pockets of the world where Christianity does indeed still have power, and they utilize it in the same way as they did in the past.
Well, and the thing is too, though. Okay, so at the end of the month here, there's actually going to be a Christian conference called "Make America Straight Again." Okay, as if our whole country is made up of the LGBTQ community. I mean, it's basically the LGBTQ community has been basically the same size demographic of our nation for decades and decades, over maybe even centuries. Okay, but now that we want to endeavor to give them all the rights that everybody else has, then all of a sudden, the whole country's gay. Let's make America straight again. I mean, and that's a form of persecution. Recently in Poland, they were talking about, the government was, whatever I'm trying to say, not talking, but whatever it is, the process is over there, is they wanted to pass a law to where gay people would be required to go to deconversion camps. Now, I mean, Poland's, it's part of Europe. It's, a little different than most westernized countries, but it's still that Poland would be considered a westernized country.
Well, and Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, tried to push gay conversion therapy as law in his state.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Let's be fair about that. What Mike Pence pushed was simply the idea that you could personally choose to go to counseling. I don't know if he was also on board with the idea that you could send a child.
Not counseling. Counseling is a bad word. Gay conversion therapy.
Well, counseling is a good word. Let me tell you why. Because a lot of times, and this is something that people get confused, right? A lot of times, these people actively seek out counselors to deal with what they personally perceive as a problem as adults, right? That's a fact. That does happen. There's people all the time who go on like Dr. Michael Brown show and the James White divided.
What is it you think gives them that idea, though, that if they're gay, that they need to seek out help?
I mean, I think that's a complicated issue, to be honest with you. I think a lot of times you could probably say, I'm not going to deny that religious upbringing could have something to do with that, but a lot of times these people don't actually list a religious motivation. In fact, one of the interesting things I've found, I know a lot of people like to laugh at Milo Yiannopoulos when he talks about his lifestyle, right? I find it to actually be very interesting and a very interesting look into.
I find it to be tragic.
Exactly. And it's for that reason that I find it to be interesting, because it's one of those things where you see like this person, and not because he maintains his Catholic faith at the same time, and he says that it's explainable, and he basically deals away with it, right?
Yeah, he also says that the Catholic priest that raped him did so because it's his fault.
Yeah, and it's disgusting, right? It's one of those things, but you see there that's not religious motivation. That's a lot of trauma and very bad decisions that he associates with his lifestyle, and things that happened to him that he believes are what caused his lifestyle, and so on and so forth. You know what I mean? So it's like, this is a complicated, and I want to actually state something kind of out in the open as to why I have sometimes sounded dismissive of people, right? I believe when you start saying things like, no, you guys are you're hateful, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, you just can't stand these people, you want to persecute them, all that. That, in my opinion, is an example of being a dishonest interlocutor, because there is the vast majority of Christians who do believe that these things are problematic, do not hold ill will. You talked about the Make America Straight Again conference. I don't know if that's the same as the one that happened in 2018 or 17.
Well, they do hold ill will, though. So maybe the average Christian isn't the Matt Powell or Steven Anderson of the world that is calling for the execution of gay people, but the average Christian is calling that gay people can't have the right of marriage. To sit here and say that Christianity and that religion isn't leading to the inequality of a segment of our population is to be disingenuous, because it does.
Can I be fair though? That what you just said there is not the same thing as saying you're a transphobic bigot who hates gay people.
Well, not so not all homophobes are Christian, right? But I think a lot of Christians are homophobic, and it's within their religion to be so. And I would say the majority, I would say the majority of American Christians would be all for repealing gay marriage in this country. That's why they all have hard-ons right now for this judge. You have a hard-on right now for this judge getting in there. You know you do.
Well, no, hang on. We need to be clear, right? Because, and this is another thing, right? I have the same issues when it comes to Barrett as I did with Kavanaugh, which is I think that the attacks are so bad. Let me just give you a perfect example of the reason.
She belongs to a cult that even the Vatican won't recognize as a part of Catholicism.
Well, that's not a dispositive comment for CJ because he doesn't think Catholics are Christians.
That's fair. Right?
Are you one of those, CJ?
I believe that Catholicism is a rank heresy. I think there is absolutely no way to understand the teachings of Scripture and conclude that Catholicism is any more similar to Christianity than Islam.
Do you understand that
we're definitely going to be talking about this when Knox done? Because
don't you understand that your version of Christianity comes from that? Like that was the first. It was the first.
That's false. That is historically inaccurate. The only people who actually and I'm not saying this as an insult. I'm just being honest with you. The only people who seriously study religion and believe that are Catholics.
All right. So what came before? I mean, I'm not talking about the Jewish sects, because there was Jewish sects of Christians. Sure. Paul changed all of that shit though. Like, Paul changed all of that. So you're talking the first real organized, structured Christianity was Catholicism for a lot of years until the Reformation came, I believe.
Right. So that's not true. I'm just being straight, right? That's just not true. So first and foremost, we need to understand what exactly is the Roman Catholic Church. There's a whole bunch of dogma that doesn't even exist until at least the 15th century, right? So there's a lot of points where you could say, well, this is where the Catholic Church begins. Well, this is where the Catholic Church begins. So let's just give a really brief history, okay? There were Christians in Rome.
Hold on a second, though, because one thing, so you deny the fact that Paul was the creator of the Catholic Church?
Absolutely. And by the way, no Catholic believes that. They believe that Peter is the first pope.
Not Paul.
Yeah,
Paul.
I was repeating what I misspoke, Peter. But so Peter was a contemporary of Jesus Christ, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if that's not if Peter was the beginning of the Catholic Church,
well, to be fair, that's what they believe. That's not what I believe.
Okay.
Right. So
let me really, when it comes to
stuff,
I'm not trying to. I want to hear what you have to say, but I feel like that maybe you and Knox should go on what you're going to talk about, because this is kind of approaching on the stuff I had marked down here to talk to you about.
Okay.
Because we were talking about the no true Scotsman fallacy and all that.
Right.
But I think what it was, and Knox, correct me if you're wrong, you and CJ wanted to talk and try and not be talking past each other on the issue you were discussing last night. Is that what it is?
Yeah. So, and I guess last night was what was the point of last night's stream with Smokey was to address what I saw as 3 and technically 4, although it's somewhat the fourth one is somewhat irrelevant because it's not actually considered to be a fallacy, but misapplications and misusages and misrepresentations of fallacies, namely non sequitur, whataboutism, and no true Scotsman.
Yep, that's exactly the 3 issues.
And that's the stream between you and John. And really, I'm willing for the conversation to go anywhere, but no, John's correct. That's the conversation between you and John. I haven't watched all of that yet. When I came in, and first, I've got to do this, so I want to just stop for a moment.
Okay.
Because something happened when I first came into that stream, and I wanted to ask you about this because, let me find it. I recorded it once it happened. It should be this one. This is roughly going to be about 7 minutes. So I'm going to play it for a minute. I'll stop it because it should happen fairly soon, and I want to ask you about it. So let me share my screen. Ooh, let me share my screen. No, that's not it. Yeah, here we go. Let's pull it. What the hell am I doing? Let's pull this up.
Who handled even disputes, disagreements. And, you know, the Jews were the ones that came into what was a really barbaric set of cultures and set up a guideline and a standard, a judiciary, you know, a set of, you know, moral standards and systems that like ended up being emulated, you know, by other cultures, you know, of understanding the necessity of having that kind of baseline standard. You know, it's just things that aren't given credit to the Judeo-Christian God for. Just ridiculous.
Well, and you don't even have to get it with something that's as philosophically loaded as violence, even though I do think that that's not really that philosophically loaded. I don't understand why that's such a controversial thing to use. But nonetheless, like, just use something like eating.
Well, because violence has a utilization inside the context of a moral dilemma. Like, do you use violence to stop someone from being violent? That's where it always comes into play.
Well, and fair enough for sure. But you know, I would even say like eating, right? I mean, eating is absolutely something that comes naturally, but does that mean that eating can't be detrimental? Of course,
exactly.
It absolutely can. Have you ever heard of like, I mean, the litany of different heart?
What if you only want to eat gummy bears? That,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
that's natural to you. You know, I mean,
exactly. 100% the point. Like, just because eating comes naturally to humans does not mean that every act which involves eating is therefore not detrimental. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. It's a total non sequitur, meaning it does not logically follow from the previous argument.
Right. Amen. Beautiful, beautiful points.
But he's claiming it's non sequitur. But not responded directly to his comment.
It should get there soon. I started recording
with murder.
I started recording slightly before the moment happens, so we should be getting to it soon, and then I'll stop and ask you about it, CJ.
With rape, with thievery. He said that, well, murder and rape and thievery is natural to a lot of human beings. No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it people is. Aren't born.
Hang on, and let me just be clear.
Look at the urban centers and tell me it's not coming natural to all these people. What are you talking about, Peterson?
Well, and let me be clear. I am not saying, specifically in the case of violence and thievery, I'm not saying that it comes naturally to some humans. I am saying it comes naturally to every single living conscious creature on the planet. All of them. Like, that is the way that it is. Okay. Animals and
animals steal crap. Animals steal crap.
Put the shovel down, CJ.
Tiny things. You know, I mean, we had storage of, what was it? Nuts.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not 100% sure.
Cabinets, and a freaking squirrel crawled through the hole in the wall and was.
What does put the shovel down mean? I'm just ignorant as to the term.
Yeah, I'm not sure. John, what do you mean?
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt and saying that you were claiming that about some humans, and then you jump in and dig yourself deeper and admit, no, you were saying that all humans have a natural propensity to murder and rape. Like, so that's
well, and I guess I do want to be, that is a good point to clarify, because there is, and to be fair, I thought about it over the night, and it is a little bit my fault. I am conflating these specific acts of violence with the totality of the violent nature of man. So that's
and we'll get there. That's not. I thought.
Okay, fine. You just keep going.
Yeah, I thought. Hopefully, I'm not showing you the wrong. I record a lot of clips. Hopefully, I'm not showing the wrong thing. This should be it. We should get there. So let me see. I hope we're gonna get there.
Stealing out of the sack of the nuts. I mean, heck, it happens everywhere. That's natural. I mean, it just occurs.
Exactly, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, think about it. Like, if you are hungry, are you going to ask permission, or are you just going to take the other squirrel's stuff?
Right.
I'm going to take the other squirrel's stuff. I'm going to die tomorrow if I don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's this blurring of the lines of a cognitive dissonance, I guess, of understanding really even how morals function or where they come from. Atheists have a real kind of funky idea of a lot of that, I think. Anyway, okay, let's continue.
Innate sense to murder and rape. Okay, they may be born with, mental issues later in life.
I'm sorry, but if people are born gay, then they're also born pedophiles. I don't think there's any other way around that, right? Like, you're just born with your sexual proclivity at your birth. If they're making the case for gay, I don't see how you couldn't make the case for any other potential sexual divergence. Like that chick that wants to bang the Eiffel Tower. Like, she just was an Eiffel Tower exist, or I don't know how you even refer to it, Eiffel Tower actual type thing, like ever since she was born, and then she just kind of grew into it. Is that kind of where the argument flows from, CJ? I'm not like straw manning that, am I?
Well, I mean, I don't know that. I know there's an awful lot of psychologists who do believe that pedophilia is actually not something that you have a choice over. Believe it or not, that I wouldn't say that's accepted by any stretch.
But like born with it, like there's something in you, like kind of the equivocation of like, gay, like you kind of just will somehow there'll be something like I think they do say there is an argument to be made about there being a propensity. But there's a propensity for lots of things, and a propensity for a lot of things that we consider bad and need to be kept in check for the benefit of everyone.
Well,
so
and bare minimum
propensity isn't an art.
All right, so I know you saw me going off in the side chat, right? Because you guys would later comment on me going off in the side chat. Not only does he equate being born homosexual to being born a pedophile, which is something that Christians like to do. He denies doing so. And it's the same argument like Matt Powell gave in our modern day debate when he equated being born as gay as to being born Adolf Hitler, right? And to me, I was calling it out in the side chat, and you, to your credit, came in and tried to bring some nuance to what he was saying. And he kind of allowed you to do so. But I just found that moment, like I couldn't believe my ears for Smokey Saint, who claims to be a moderate Christian, a progressive that's trying to help extremists, to make the same exact claims that the extremists make. To me was, I mean, I was calling it out in the chat and it was dismissed. And I know you thought that I was going to bring that up when I actually came into the conversation. And I didn't, but to me, I don't see how you could sit there and say that Smokey Saint isn't doing the exact same thing that Matt Powell does or the NIFB does, and trying to demonize an entire people just because the religion disagrees.
Well, because I think, and this is actually why I did end up trying to clarify what Smokey was saying. I think that you're misunderstanding the point that he's making. I think what
I understand the point, and you were correct to clarify. Hey, the science really isn't out on that. That's the exact same answer I would have given. Like we're still collecting data on this, right? And he's sitting there making a claim that's just not nowhere near being proven true or to be true at all. But what he's doing is in the breath of a heartbeat, linking homosexuality and pedophilia. That's the intent of making that claim.
Well, and only Smokey Saint knows whether or not that's actually the case. But what I will say from my own personal perspective, and I don't agree, by the way, that you are born a pedophile or born a homosexual. However, if it is the case that you are born with your sexual proclivities and that sexuality is just ingrained in you from birth, whether it's genetic or otherwise, and then you get sort of blossomed later on in life, that would logically apply not only to pedophilia, but really to every sexual proclivity. Now, I don't agree with that. I personally believe it's probably much more similar to the way that we acquire tastes for certain foods, particularly things like bitter foods and things which our palate would reject naturally, like coffee and alcohol and stuff like that, where over time you start to, because of certain benefits or whatever it is, right, you associate that with good things, and over time it just becomes something that you do, and eventually you don't even understand your life apart from it. Now, obviously it's stronger with sexuality, but that would be my personal take on it.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think where you're not seeing the distinction is that if let's grant the premise that everybody is born with whatever sexual proclivity they're going to blossom into as they mature. The difference is that if you are any part of the LGBTQ community, any of the people in that community, anyone they would engage in, it would be a consensual thing. Okay. Pedophilia, however, is an aberrant behavior. And I think what you're doing is you're trying to, you and other folks like you are equating, because pedophilia is absolutely aberrant, that you want to say that any sexual proclivity that you disagree with is aberrant. Because, when you're a gay person and you have sex with other people that are, the same gender that you are, that it entails consent between two people, two adults. A child can't give consent. So that's why it's different than the other stuff. And that's why when you guys equate pedophilia with things that grown-ass adults do and consent to one another to do, you're comparing apples and oranges, because a child cannot give consent. And that's why it's morally aberrant for someone to be a pedophile.
Jen with one N asked the perfect question right here. Are you born heterosexual?
Absolutely. I mean, think about this for a second.
How are you born heterosexual and it not even be possible to be born homosexual?
Because, and I don't mean to be rude, but just to be perfectly frank, like that is, when you talk about the word disorder, and I don't mean from a psychological standpoint or from a physical medical standpoint, but just the actual definition of the word, it is that is with outside of the expected order. The expected order of sexually reproducing biological organisms is that they will mate with the opposite gender.
Accepted order by who? I think if you look throughout nature, you see homosexuality all through nature. I've had this conversation with Matt
just
Powell.
like John Peterson say, it's something that does. It's not like that's something that is occurring all of the time. It's a rare phenomenon.
It's not something that's occurring all of the time within humanity.
That's exactly
they're a very small demographic.
That's exactly my point, though, is there is clearly a way in which the species reproduces, and then there is behaviors. And by the way, to kind of, because I understand where you're coming from, John and Jen and Rage, I do get what you guys are saying, but let me be a little bit more clear, I guess, as to what I would be saying in this particular regard. I mean, I would argue, and I'm not saying they have any equal levels of condemnation, because, I mean, quite frankly, I don't really care what you do with a full-grown adult in your bedroom, but oral sex is another example of an aberration, right? That's not a necessarily ordered thing. It doesn't produce children.
You're not allowed to take away oral sex, CJ.
No, I'm not saying take it away. That's actually my point, is that I'm not taking it, right? I'm not telling anybody that you're evil or sinful or something like that for having oral sex. My point actually is precisely that just because something is aberrant doesn't necessarily mean that it's negative, even though, of course, everybody's fully aware that I am a biblical fundamentalist on this issue and many others. The point of that, though, is just to state that there are certain things that we do that aren't necessarily, what would be the right way to put this, leading to biological reproduction, which is the function, biologically speaking, of.
Is that the only function of sexual activity, though?
I mean, it's certainly the original one. I don't know if you could necessarily say only.
What I'm asking you, do you believe that sex is only for reproduction of human beings?
Well, that's kind of why I think I would say original. I wouldn't say only. The reason I wouldn't say only, I would just say, I don't think anybody who's ever been in a committed relationship and had a decent and or good sex life could ever disregard how important that is to that relationship. It's a very serious moment of bonding that I think is not properly fleshed out when we actually discuss these kinds of things. That being said, though, that is also kind of aberrant in the sense that other animals don't seem to have those same, at least not always. It seems to occur with some animals, like wolves tend to be kind of monogamous and have really strong mating pairs and so on. But
species of animals that mate for life.
We're kind of getting away from my point, though. So, is it acceptable for Smokey Saint or Christianity to sit there and continuously lump? Let me think. Continuously lump being a homosexual, whether you're man, woman, non-binary, trans, to considerably lump a group of people in with one of the most detestable groups of people that you could pick, right? Like, Christians do it with atheists when it comes to Hitler, and we have to point out, no, Hitler was a Christian. There were some problems there, but he was, technically a Christian.
He was an occultist.
But it's just something that Christians do, and they do it to demonize this group of people that their Bible tells them to disagree with. So for you to sit here and say that you are born heterosexual and yet they are not born homosexual, I just don't see where you're getting scientific data or any data at all to conclude that outside of your own personal worldview from a book written 2,000 years ago.
Well, it's the clear demonstration of all species that reproduce sexually, right? Like, as I just said, that is clearly what and I obviously, would have certain disagreements with some things in the evolutionary field. But one thing I think we would all agree on is, regardless of what is true, right, as far as like a evolutionary view in the traditional sense, or in one of the like Stephen Gould sense, or is it Steve? I don't know his name anyways, or so on and so forth, right? What we would all agree on is absolutely the original and base, function of sex, just in the same way that the original and base function of eating is to have sustenance and continue to be alive, right? The original and base reason for sex is reproduction. So sex that is outside of that is by definition disorder. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? But it is definitely a
well, I mean, if you're saying by definition it's disorder, you can't in the next breath say well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I mean, well, disorder has very negative connotations, and I mean, we're talking about words that have meaning.
Well, and the thing is, though, is a lot of these things like disorder and abnormal and stuff like that, people take them as offensive, but they're really not. They just mean that which is outside the norm, or that which is outside the order, right? I mean, just as a perfect example, I mean, my hair is long.
So is there a choice?
Men throughout history have had short hair, at least throughout Western history, have had short hair. One could argue that I am going outside of order for men, right? But that doesn't mean anything.
Is there a choice, CJ? Could you choose today to be gay?
I believe that it wouldn't be a today thing, but yeah, I think that if I decided I was going to expose myself to that, I think over a long period of time, I would eventually start to enjoy it.
So maybe you're like, you're watching Saved by the Bell, and at first it's all good, but then you start to know that you're getting that chubby every time you see Zach. So it's like a progressive thing, and then you make the choice to act on that.
I mean, I don't think it would necessarily happen in that sense, although I guess I don't really know. But I think that it's similar to that, right? I use the example of, and it's not as strong because sexuality is a much stronger force, but of coffee, right? Coffee's bitter and it's gross. And the first time you drink it, virtually everybody has the same reaction, which is, right? And yet, over a period of time, you continue to drink it and you eventually start to enjoy it. And now, I drink the stuff black for fun at 8 o'clock at night, you know what I mean? Because I just like the drink. Now, obviously, sexuality is a much stronger driving force in our minds and in our biology than just wanting to stay awake or have a tasty drink. But you kind of get the idea, right? It's like these preferences are developed over time. I don't think you could just, I'm gay now.
But
right?
So where are you getting that from? Because I mean, every gay person that I know and that I've met have told me how they struggled with it for so long because they were always that, and they had this pressure from like people like you in society telling them that they're not like that they are heterosexual, that is the only natural way to be. And so they repress that for so long. I mean, we see the direct hateful results of that within the Catholic Church. They repress their sexuality, so they go and rape little children, right? I mean, it's there, for the data's there. I'm just wondering, like, where are you getting this data from that makes you believe this shit?
Well, let me give you a perfect example of it, actually. So I'm very involved in trying to combat the pornography industry, right? So I happen to know a lot of statistics about pornography. One of the interesting things, and this is not unique to pornography by any stretch, but since pornography is about sex, it'll help illustrate the point. One of the interesting things about pornographic algorithms is that they actually try to put forward harder and harder versions of what you are believed to be enjoying. So, for example, if you are somebody who really likes big butts, it'll be twerking at first, and then maybe they'll just have anal at first, and then maybe that'll get to these other crazy things that they'll go on and so forth, right?
I like anal sex. Does that make me gay?
No, that's not even close to the point.
Well, I mean, is that going to lead to me being gay because I have anal sex with chicks sometimes?
The point. You're completely missing the point.
Maybe I am. I don't know.
They rely on exposing you over time, leading you to develop certain kinks. Right. And by the way, this is not something that is unique to the porn industry. I know that Slate is a magazine, but just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, Slate was explaining this to a man who was asking, he's like, I'm all of a sudden at the age of 50 and 60, I seem to be having bisexual proclivities. Where does this come from? And they were explaining that there are many psychologists who do agree that these kinds of things do actually develop over time. And it does make a lot of sense. I mean, the whole gay gene thing has been debunked by now, right? We know for a fact it's not real.
Well, there's no hetero gene either.
Well, and that's a fair argument. But to be fair, right, as I've already said, we know that, and it's not disputable, the base and original reason for sexual intercourse is sexual reproduction, right? Like I said, I don't think that means it's the only one.
Maybe back in the day that was a necessary component. And I've often said this. See, back in the day, we needed to reproduce. We were trying to dominate the world. Now we have. We live in a new world. That 2,000-year book no longer applies, CJ. It just doesn't. And there's no reason to, I mean, do what you want to do. If you want to be in a monogamous relationship with one person for the rest of your life, and that person is a woman and you're a man, my man, do that. Nobody's trying to stop you from that. The problem is people are trying to stop other people from doing what they want to do and need to do, because that's who they are as human beings. That's how they were born, my dude. And that's just the way it is. It's just that they were born the way they are. Until now, societies have suppressed them. Now there are certain societies that no longer are doing that, or we're trying to get away from doing that, right? And this is something like you can look in Native American tribes all throughout history, and most tribes accepted this as just human nature. This is just the way it is. And you could be a man and still have that woman's role. It's all about the role within the tribe. And it doesn't matter how you were technically born.
So if that, because now you do actually beg an interesting question here, not literally in the fallacious sense of speaking. If it is true that they are absolutely born this way and that's just the way it is, where exactly does that stop? Let's leave pedophilia, because I understand that that's a sensitive issue because of the fact that certain people like Steven Anderson have made it that way, right? I get that.
And Smokey's trying to make it that way. I mean, he literally was trying to make it that way in that clip that I showed. I mean,
let's leave that for a second. Okay,
I think that we can both agree that Smokey Saint is smart enough to understand what he's doing when he does it.
Well, so, and like I said, let's go ahead and move away from that one and say sadism, something that can be totally controlled, can be with a totally willing partner, right? It's not necessarily criminal in any way or taking advantage of anyone in any way, although sometimes it can be. Would you also argue that being sadistic is something that you are born with?
Well, wait a minute. When you're talking about sexual activity, it wouldn't just be sadism, okay? Because if you're a sadist and then you act as a sadist against another human being in a sexual situation, that's wrong. It's illegal. It's immoral.
Not necessarily.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Sorry, go ahead.
What I'm trying to make is that if there's a relationship going on with sadism, it also entails masochism. Okay, because the sadist likes to dole it out, the masochist likes to receive it. So if it's not S&M, it's not a consensual thing. So to just say sadism is wrong. That's all I was trying to correct you on.
All right, and that's a fair point. So then let's say sadomasochism, right? So the whole thing, the SM, would that also be something, and I guess on both ends, right? Are you born wanting to have some level of domination over you or pain? Are you born wanting to be dominant or, some level of controlling in that sense? Like, is that also, like, how deep does this, I am innately born with this sexual trait go? You know what I mean? Because that's really, at least in my view, that's how I understand the point that Smokey is trying.
Well, the thing is S&M, though, is not a sexual proclivity per se. I mean, it's not a sexual nature that you're born with. I would grant you that. Okay, I mean, S&M is an activity within sexual content that people can enjoy and decide that they're going to enjoy it. But when you're talking about your sexuality, what other human beings you are attracted to, what gender you feel inside despite what your body is, those are the things that you're born with. When you're talking about the different activities, well, then that is something that probably comes with time. You find out what you enjoy, because people aren't born wanting to have sex the minute they're born.
Well, and now we're coming to like the gist of the argument, right? That started on Twitter is being open sexually, is that natural? And I think we were talking past each other. I think I clarified my position for you, CJ, last night a little bit because you thought I was talking about promiscuity when I wasn't. I was referring to a natural state of human beings wanting to be open about who they are. And I think we both agreed that we were talking past each other. But let's address the issue of promiscuity, because that's what you are asking of me right now is, do I agree with a certain level of promiscuity or just all out anarchy, so to speak, maybe when it comes to promiscuity? And I will say I believe that you should be able to do whatever the fuck you want as long as it's within the confines of the law and within consent. So if you like to if you're a heterosexual male, right, and you like to have sex with cis women and you're a cis male and that's what you're into, but you also like to throw your finger up your butthole every once in a while, I'm down with that. Do you, boo? That's my thing. As long as it's not harmful, you're not harming anybody, do it, because you are the person that you are. And you shouldn't be ashamed of your sexuality as long as you're not harming other people. That's my stance on it.
So then, and let me kind of, I guess, clarify my point in what I was trying to say as well, because I think one of the things that I definitely misinterpreted was your understanding of the word natural as meaning that all human beings would do it. And I do think, I think there's a certain truth, as I said last night, to the claim that all humans have a certain propensity towards things like thievery and murder. That doesn't mean that all would. But I mean, if I asked you guys just straight up, right, have you ever even for a moment thought you could kill somebody? If you said no, I just wouldn't believe you, because that's something that humans do. We get really angry and we start to become irrational, and maybe it just stays in our head.
I almost did kill somebody.
There you go, right?
Yeah, I almost did.
I did kill somebody through negligence.
Well, see, I mean,
my argument isn't that certain individuals can be put in situations to where they would murder. I would argue that no situation would ever make me rape, right? But I could be placed into
and that was probably a bad one
where I murder. Like if somebody comes after my child, that person is going to die before my child does, right? So,
and if I could just say, the last time it crossed my mind that I could maybe murder somebody was a little earlier when we were talking about smoking.
I mean, I do have a video on my channel to where I spoke of a instance in my life when I was in prison, and I was a gangbanger, and I it's a complicated story, but I dropped a weight on the dude's head. We kicked him and punched him a lot before the guards came with their mace, and he had internal bleeding. I almost killed him, and they said if he would have died, then I was facing murder charges. So yeah, I was pushed to a limit at one point, and I was in a situation at one point. But the argument, is it natural? Are most people in those positions going to make that choice? And I ultimately didn't make that choice. I did not kill that man. He's still living today. And I don't think that unless they're coming after my child, I could make that choice. And even then, if there's any way to stop them without taking their life, I would try to do that route, right? So it's not a natural thing. It's something that I honestly have to believe you are pushed to, either through psychosis or through some very irrational fear.
Well, and so I think there's a lot to be said there for sure. I do think that, and I appreciate you guys being honest, because there's obviously some sensitive issues. I think that does make my point, though, in the sense that, we do have as a species, and really, and this is why, so John, you had made the claim, you said, put down the shovel, and now that I know what you mean there, right? And I do want to specify, being specific like that and saying specifically those crimes rather than the general word violence was a mistake on my part. And I just want to fully own that at the moment.
And real quick too, I was joking when I mentioned Smokey, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I figured the first comment was the more sensitive one, but nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, just to specifically tell you, some years ago, I got behind the wheel of my car completely drunk, way over the limit, and I ended up killing a young man of 27 years old with my vehicle. So.
Well, and I knew.
Here, let me do this. So, let me turn on my camera real quick, just to kind of maybe hopefully show people You can see it actually right here. So let me get closer. Let me show it. Oh, here, let's just move my camera here. So yeah, you can see it right there. If I can get a good angle on it, that's a brand. That's Crippin' Folk. That's from when I was a gangbanger. I was a gangbanger between the ages of about 19 to 21, 22, maybe. It took a long time after I actually left the gang to get out of that mentality. All right, that's all. I'm going to turn my camera back off.
Well, and so, I think that there is two things there that we do definitely see. Number one, that point, if I do actually clarify and rephrase that to be a stronger argument instead of, misusing like I did, right? Specifics like that. It is true that violence is something that is absolute. And you even said yesterday, Rage, that you agreed with me that violence is not only natural, but it's equal in its naturality to sexuality, in the sense that 100% of all human beings, without exception, have a propensity to violence.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I just don't agree that all people are have a propensity towards murder or rape.
Right. So let's grant that we do disagree, at least on the murder one, because I do think with the rape one, that was also just a poor example in general to use, because what I meant with that is that rape does occur very often with other species, but obviously they have their own reproductive natures and stuff like that. So that was just a poor argument on my part.
Yeah, I would grant you that. I don't think that there's any disagreement on rape, and potentially, yeah, I think we could delve deep into the human psychosis and try to determine if murder is natural or not. I would agree with you there.
For sure. So then, let's use the word violence then, because it is a retreat on my part. I'll grant that, but it does make the argument stronger, right? Violence, though not always, is primarily a negative thing, right? It's obviously sometimes violence is as simple as eating, because obviously killing a animal is a form of violence. It's just not a form of violence in the same sense that killing a human is. And other times it can be incredibly negative, like you just want to beat someone up, you want to murder someone. I would argue, even though I agree sometimes that war is necessary, war is always evil. There's no exception. You're either doing evil things or responding to somebody who's doing evil things, and as a result, having to do evil things, right? But nonetheless, hey, Rage, are you hearing me right now? You look frozen.
Yeah, I don't get it on screen. It looks frozen on screen, but I'm not. Do y'all hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Okay, that's odd.
That's really weird. Yeah, I'm actually using my virtual tool, and it looks like it froze.
It's so funny because I thought Knock was giving you the stink eye there.
Like I'm literally using my virtual tool, and I don't know why it's doing that. So,
but the point being, right? Because my claim there was that basically, you saying that we have a natural propensity for something doesn't mean that it can't be detrimental. And I would even take it a step further in saying, because now that I know that by natural you mean occurring in all humans and not just something that could occur without man-made mechanisms, right? I would argue that honestly makes the argument stronger, because violence, as we would agree, is definitely, and thievery also, the idea that we want to, take things which either could benefit us in a pleasurable way or benefit us in a way that'll help us live better or live at all, right? Those are certainly things that are natural to all living species as well. But those are almost primarily always negative and detrimental.
And here's the thing, just to agree with you on one point, but show you the disconnect on the other, just like I was talking to you about how, pedophilia is something that some people are probably naturally born with that propensity, and that is a bad thing. That's, you were saying, all things that you're born that are natural are not necessarily good things. And that is definitely one thing that is not a good thing if you have that propensity and you're born with it. But that doesn't hold true for the, any kind of LGBTQ person. It's just not the same.
Or just women that are open with their sexuality, enjoy sex, isn't going to be held down by a single man and do their thing as long as they're being safe and not spreading disease. I'm all for that, or anybody, not just a woman. But it seems to be the problem is promiscuous women, and that's Smokey's issue. That's the issue of a lot of Christians as well, and the LGBTQ plus issue.
Well, and let me ask you straight up. You said you watched the exchange between Smokey and Jen. Did you find Jen's behavior last night as aberrant?
As aberrant, I guess, no, because, quite frankly, I think that most women that I've ever met in my life are a lot like Jen in the sense that the puritanical model of the way the women behave is just not really much of a thing anymore. It is certainly like there's definitely women who do that, but for the most part, at least in my generation, I would say most women are pretty open, and most men also are pretty open about their sexuality.
Did you take exception to her behavior last night?
I absolutely would, but so let me kind of explain that, because I understand that an instant question that would come from that is, okay, well, what about Smokey, right? I personally, I have little to no respect for anything I have seen from Jen Aldrich at this point. Not as a person. I'm not saying she's a bad person or anything like that. I just don't I want to, as I am doing right now, have conversations with people that are a little bit more than, hey, you showed up in a red bra and you have a 3-inch penis and stuff like that. Or, what I consider to be just ridiculously crude understandings of, which, to be fair, she even freely admits, of anything in the philosophical, psychological, or theological realm, right? Which are really the most important things if you want to discuss politics or religion. That's socio-political is why it's called, right? Socio-political, society and sociology and the way we act through philosophy and theology and all these other things is vital to that whole question. And I don't appreciate that. That said, if Jen ever said, okay,
wait a minute, real quick, just before you continue, CJ, can you possibly understand just how brave that was for Jen Aldrich to come on that stream last night only in her bra, to get over all of her self-image issues that every human being has, to sit there before she came on, because we were waiting, and it had to be hard for her. Am I going to do this? Am I not? Should I do this? Should I not? And she ultimately chose to be that brave individual that's going to come on a stream and just be the woman that she is. Because the issue isn't that Jen Aldrich came in the stream wearing a bra. The issue is that Smokey Saint has been fascinated on not only her boobs, but on her bedwear, on her drapes, on her bedroom behind her, and everything that doesn't matter about her as a woman and the things that she says when she goes on camera.
And the other thing I just want to add is, you said a moment ago about how I forget the words you used. But she came on with her boobs out and telling Smokey he's got a 3-inch dick. Do you think that's the totality of her content on YouTube? You think
I've watched a couple of her videos. I've watched the Pick Me Purity, the Cuties, and the WAP video in full. So I'm not by any stretch unfamiliar with who Jen Aldrich is. And by the way, I would say plainly, if Jen Aldrich ever
you said you watched 2 videos, how does that make you exceedingly familiar with Jen Aldrich?
Well, let's be fair. She has something like 20 or 25, so it's not like that's like a 7 or an 8.
She does a lot of work. She's been on the Atheist Experience, and she's also doing work on Elia Kai's channel. They have a podcast together. She's doing a lot of work.
No, I know, and she also is frequently on with this. I think she's a pagan. I'm not 100% sure, but she does live streams with.
That's Elia Kai, yeah.
Is that Elia Kai?
She is a pagan. She's a Hellenist, yes.
But it's not like, you know what I mean? It would be, and to be fair, John, I don't know how many of my videos you've watched, right? But I can't imagine you've watched 3 videos in full, right? But you would still consider yourself to be familiar with me as a person because of other things and things of that nature, right? Am I accurate in presenting that?
You talk a lot about your ideas, so I feel like I know you ideologically. I don't really know, in just about every conversation we ever had was an ideological one. So,
CJ, I think you're a decent dude. I was a bit disappointed last night. I'm glad that we cleared it up. My final question, and then I want you and John to have your time, because I know you don't have too awful long tonight, right? And Leo, if you're listening, we're going to set a date at the end of this stream for Leo and Synagogue to talk communism. But my final question is it appropriate for Smokey Saint to call Jen Aldrich an ethot, a whore, and a prostitute? Is that appropriate?
No, I would plainly say no. And actually, the thing I was about to say is, if Jen ever approached me and said, look, I don't think that I've gotten a fair shake because of this different representation thanks to Smokey, and I want to have a one-on-one actual conversation, drop all presuppositions or anything like that and have a conversation. Why not? I
appreciate that answer, dude, because a lot of Christians need to tell Smokey to stop. Just stop. Have your disagreements with Jen Aldridge. Stop focusing on her boobs. Stop focusing on her bedroom, and approach the woman as the woman instead of the things that he says. That is my advice. But I do want to give you and John your chance to like hash out maybe some of your disagreements. So I'm gonna mute, and if I feel like I should pipe in, I will. I want to thank you for coming on and addressing this issue with me. I did reach out to James about the party switch thing. So first
Sure.
debate. So we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully soon. Me and CJ will be debating. Did the parties switch back in civil rights?
Coolio, and I appreciate you also having me too. And I know we're going to continue here a little bit, but I do just want to point that out. Right, it is obviously like I
like you as a
understand.
dude, although we disagree on everything.
Well, and to be fair, I mean that's perfectly fine. I mean, one of my like actual best friends is a guy by the name of well, I won't say his full name because he hasn't put his YouTube channel out yet. But once he does, I'll be able to say the full thing. But his name's Nikolai. I gotta be honest with you. You remind me of him a lot, like an awful lot. And I'm obviously we're not like people who like know each other particularly well in that sense, right? We talk over online. But the point being that like there's no reason why we can't be friendly with each other as hardcore atheists and fundamentalist Christians. I mean, honestly, there's really not.
I'm about conversation, and I don't live in bubbles. I don't hide myself away from opposition. I want to talk to people that think differently than I do. I want to understand what makes you tick, and you can only do that through continued discourse. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, CJ.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you having me.
Leo
Let's go.
is in the live chat, and I want to ask Leo to stick around, and when we get done, if you could pop, we'll put the link in, and if you could pop in for like 2 minutes and set a date and a time with
Well, and yes, real quick, not to cut you off, John. I'm sorry. Jen with one N.
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I not to
I have that marked
not
down.
to hide that.
I know what she's talking about, and I have that marked down in my notes.
A future discussion. I am definitely would like to get into that with CJ, but considering what had happened last night, and I had the video clip, and it was kind of centered around that same topic. I think that we delved into it, and I think that that'll be a conversation me and CJ we'll have in the future at some point. So definitely.
Okay. So, I mean, do you mind if we just go through the few topics in the order I have them here in my notes, or?
No, let's go. Definitely.
Okay. The first thing I want to touch on was the non sequitur, where you had claimed something Knock had said was non sequitur, and then I, very snarkily, said, "Well, you don't know what non sequitur is, then," and we kind of went at each other. I mean, and this is the tweet that it came out of. Just let me read this briefly. I wish I was up on all the technology like Knock is, and I could have had this as on the screen for you. But Knock had said, "How are people living in their nature detrimental to society?" Saying if people are acting, in the nature that they're born with, like, how is that detrimental to society? I would say prudes shaming people over their sexuality is detrimental to it. Okay, that's what he said, commenting on your original tweet. And then you came back with lots of detrimental things are natural. Murder, rape, thievery, etc. all come very naturally to most living creatures. Now, we definitely worked that issue out. And, I commend you on, reformulating your argument, based on, what Knock had said. And, but then now Knock comes back with, yes, but you said sexuality, murder, no brainer, rape, thievery, all no brainers. But that wasn't your statement. Yes, but your statement implied that I was wrong simply because sexuality comes naturally to humans, which is a total non sequitur. Please explain how it was a total non sequitur.
Yeah, absolutely. So the definition of a non sequitur is conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement.
Yeah.
So using that as my definition, I would conclude that the argument that it comes naturally either to an individual or to a species does not logically follow from that argument that therefore it cannot be detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, just like you did a few moments ago, you've got me rethinking my position a little bit. But the fact of the matter is that in the topic of discussion at the time, based on the comments you made prior, and not disregarding what you just said, because that does make sense. But I think in the context of what you and Knock were talking about at the time, it truly isn't a non sequitur, because you were making the argument that certain specific behaviors were natural that now you've agreed not necessarily weren't the best examples, murder, rape, okay? And then you were talking about originally people being open about their sexuality, which is inherent in all human beings. I mean, I think Knock proved that when he talked to you about being heterosexual, and you talk about the fact that you're freely admit that you're heterosexual and a monogamous person. Well, that is being open and honest about your sexuality, which these other people that you disagree with their sexuality are doing. Being promiscuous, as you put it.
Right. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, just to put a pin in it and let you go, is that when Knock responded to you, I could see what you're saying about how it could be construed as a non sequitur, maybe in another conversation. But in this conversation, he was directly responding to the points you had put out. And I say that it can't be non sequitur then, if he's responding to the very points you were making. But go ahead.
So there's a couple things I would say. So the first thing I would say is the word I was actually using there was promiscuity and not sexuality. Now, and the reason I specify that, I actually did. I made a personal mistake last night on Smokey's stream. I don't know if you guys caught it. But
well, in the tweet, you didn't though. It was about sexuality, not promiscuity. And you just you admitted last night in the stream that you assumed that I meant promiscuity and then I explained how I didn't.
Right, but I'm talking about my very first tweet.
You used both words, I guess is the best way to put it. You did say promiscuity at one point, but you were talking sexuality also in the thread. But go ahead.
Right, and admittedly, right, that is a confusion on my part. So let me kind of clarify, right? So what I was in the original tweet, right, before I had any responses from anybody, what I was making the claim of is that promiscuity, which I would define as, well, I mean, really, I don't have to define it. We could look up the dictionary definition, but my definition would just be that which is sex outside of heterosexual relationships. I wouldn't necessarily say marriage, because that doesn't really make any sense if you're stuck with one person but you don't have a contract. That's not promiscuous by any stretch of the imagination. I did yesterday say heterosexual monogamous marriage, but I was rethinking that today. That's a Christian definition of what is just. That's not what promiscuous is. So I retract that statement. But nonetheless, so if promiscuity is something that is natural, well, that's not something that every human being necessarily does per se, right? So that is something that is, in a sense, comparable to specific acts, right? Maybe not necessarily those specific acts, although I think, we kind of hammered the murderous nature of humans, the violent nature of humans, which is very much stronger, and we didn't really get onto the thievery, but that one's kind of that one's more of a. I mean, thievery is only a concept among humans because all animals steal, right? But we're the only ones who actually put the word thief to it. But nonetheless,
Can I ask you a question before you go on?
Yeah.
Why is promiscuity bad?
So I would say a couple of things. So first and foremost, I do believe that for the structure of society, for the order of society, it is best to have strong family units which raise children.
Why does that preclude promiscuity?
Because for the most part, there seems to be a definite lack of that amongst us. So let me give some examples, right? Let's start with the most obvious one, which is separate parent households, right? Well, separate parent households have long been known to be very problematic in the country. They lead to numerous things. They lead to a higher propensity to take drugs, higher propensity to be promiscuous yourself, higher propensity to have kids outside of marriage, higher propensity to be violent, join gangs, etc. Right? It's a very negative thing for parent. And in fact, just to be perfectly clear, it's such a negative thing that I differentiate from a lot of my fundamentalist brethren in saying that I think we should do controlled studies on married homosexual couples adopting kids. And if it turns out that those studies show there is absolutely no difference, then I am all for it, because it is a very detrimental thing to have one parent raising. In fact, in many instances, the parent who is at fault, I would almost say, is guilty of child abuse. Not so like the single mother who is raising her child because the dad left. That right? I'm not saying anything about her, but the dad who left and decided to abandon that child, I would almost clarify that. I mean, that person needs to be charged with a crime that is child abuse. And I take a very, very strict stance on that. So let's say outside of that, though, what if you have something like a adulterous relationship or even just an open relationship, right? Well, open relationships, at least so far, we don't have very much information on them, so I can't necessarily say. We do know that back in the day, like way back in the day, like the Roman and Greek times, these sorts of things did definitely happen, but society actually did end up collapsing pretty hardcore around the time that these things became universally accepted, with certain exceptions that I think are interesting and noteworthy, like pedo.
Society started collapsing. When was this?
Well, these specific societies, you're right. So the Roman society had a very, very elongated collapse, but they really started being hectic and then periodically remaining so about the time that Augustus Caesar died. And then all the way up until finally by the 400s, it was a total hellhole to live in the Roman Empire.
Because of promiscuity?
No, I'm not saying strictly because of promiscuity, but that is certainly something that is that seems to be an example of societies that are getting closer to dying, right? And it's not the only one. Drug use, I think, is that as well. People who are having low respect for authority, even though very often authority. I mean, I'm totally a questioner of authority, but you see how these certain things could come into play and seem to be factors or signs, at least, of a collapsing society. Nonetheless, so the point I'm trying to actually make here, because I am kind of getting a little bit on a tangent. Promiscuity in these certain relationships does seem to be leading to, right, whether it's adultery or whether it is open relationships, it does seem to be either a sign in these older societies of what is being a horrible moral collapse, or at least in our own society, I mean, adultery just doesn't work, right? That's one of the most common reasons for people to get divorced. Open relationships very often end. They don't last 20 plus years. They don't last 10 plus years very often. And by the way, children live 18 years in your household.
I'd have to see data on that. I mean, it sounds like you're trying to quote data. I mean, that I would need to have a. There's my girl, my co-host Faye. That picture of her, CJ. That was the day that we were talking to Chris Shelton about Scientology, and he got her eyes bugged out of her head telling us about what Scientology is all about. Well, so first of all, I want to say how pleasantly surprised I am that you, as someone who identifies as a fundamentalist, say that you're willing to look at the issue of gay people adopting kids because for the kids' sake. That surprised me very much. But this whole thing, and I want to move on because we kind of got away from the actual meat of it, the logical fallacy we have a difference on. But promiscuity, though, would you be willing to submit that your definition of promiscuity might not match up with other people's definition of promiscuity?
I would be willing to grant that certainly can be the case because human beings are unique and we're definitely all going to have our own ideas. But I would say that not only in America, but even cross-culturally, people would tend to agree. And the only thing that they usually redefine is what certain terms would mean. Like, so for example, in a lot of polygamous cultures, they would still agree sex outside of marriage is wrong, but they would drop the monogamous part, which is a slight difference. I'll definitely grant that. But you see the general core does seem to be almost cross-cultural.
Yeah, well, I mean, my only response to that, and then we can move on, is that the majority of humanity, like, people be freaks, man. I mean, that's all I'm
true.
saying.
I mean,
I'm not saying you.
I do want to state, like, just publicly, by the definition of Smokey Saint's terms, I am a whore. I'm a whore. I've never been married. I've slept with a lot of people. I sleep with a lot of people. Sometimes I sleep with myself. So I am a whore.
Yeah, you sleep with yourself. Rosie Palm and her 5 sisters.
Well, and to be fair, though, I mean, Rage, you understand that everybody who takes the Bible seriously would have to condemn that behavior, right? Regardless of if they like you as a person or even say anything about it, right? If you ask them the question, is this wrong? You understand that anybody who takes the Bible seriously would have to say yes.
Why condemn behavior you don't quite understand, though? Because every person I've had a sexual relationship with, I have cared for deeply. And most of them, we are still deeply connected.
Well, to be fair, there are lots of things that I don't understand that I condemn. Not to compare the actual action, right? But I don't understand, like, for example, serial murderers. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like I said, I'm not saying you're doing that, but it's like just because I don't understand.
See, there's that conflation again that you guys kind of sneak in there, like.
Well, no, you have to understand the conflation there is not a conflation of the issues. It's a comparison for reductio ad absurdum's sake, right? To show you that just because I don't understand something doesn't really mean anything, right? It could still be wrong, or it could still be wrong even in my opinion, right? Like that's not necessarily something that means I can't condemn it. And like that's why I specified. I'm not saying that Knock is equal to a serial murderer by any stretch. I mean, there is leaps and bounds of steps in moral logic that would have to be made for that to occur, right? But you see the point, right? Like I can totally not understand something and find it to be wrong. But what I'm saying is you know what?
But CJ, like I've never been married, right? And yet I have a child that is so precious. She's like the greatest thing that ever happened, and it happened out of wedlock. It happened out of God's good graces. She is a great human being that loves people. Right, like
I grant that totally.
Do you not see just how God might not play a thing in that?
No, well, actually, I would go farther for you in that and to say God definitely does. I don't know why necessarily. He's the one who knows his specific reasons for doing specific things, but I can give an example. Solomon, who is believed to be the wisest king according to Jewish tradition, and who is believed according to Jewish and Christian tradition to have penned 3 books of the Old Testament, was born of a horribly adulterous relationship that involved a murder, right? It was something, and it's highly condemned. The specific act is highly condemned.
Funny you bring up Solomon, because he was like God's dude on earth, and yet he was sleeping with thousands of women, had concubines and wives, and
right, and he was condemned for it, right? The scripture.
Well, I mean, was he condemned, or is he resting in heaven beside God because he was God's dude? Honestly, speak honestly.
Well, and actually, to be fair with you, there are 2 different things that I would want to comment on with that. So the first one, just to be brief, there are people who believe Solomon died a pagan. I don't hold that view, but it's possible. The evidence is not terrible, I'll be honest with you.
So, real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Well, the other thing I was just going to say is, there is a dual what would you say here? It's not in Christianity. There's not a paradigm of either or between things like grace and law. G.K. Chesterton is a Christian philosopher from the early 1900s who actually speaks about the quote unquote paradoxes of Christianity. It is 100% law. What Solomon did is evil and even in God's eyes condemnable by death, and yet God can still be gracious enough to save him. Right? It is both 100% grace and 100% law. It's not either or. This is the reason why I can sit here, since I take this seriously. This is the reason why I can sit here and hear you say things like, I used to be a gangbanger and, and I've, am considered to be a whore and all that kind of stuff. And it's water over the duck's back because that's exactly what my religion teaches me. I'm not here to condemn you. That's not my position, right? My position, if anything, would be to try to lead you out of a condemnation by virtue of evangelization, right?
And yeah, I get condemned, and so do people like Jen Aldrich by Christians every day. I like Dr. Josh Bowen, a person that I think, unless you're just like an idiot, you have to kind of respect, right? Like, made my first T-shirt, which is 100% reprobate, because so many Christians call me that alongside the sodomites that would be homosexual and gay and pan and non-binary and all of my fellow human beings, and I'm right there with them, and I'm so utterly proud of that fact, CJ. I am. Like, I can't describe to you how that makes me proud that I am as hated by God as they are.
So
go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to move on here. And like one thing I want to point out, we don't have to have a discussion about it, but like at one point in that thread that you were talking to Knock in, he had asked you for some links or citations, and you did say there was other links, and you said, but here's one that'll get you started. I don't all other ones off the top of my head. And you linked to an article from the Heritage Foundation. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is that you had said earlier, yeah, I want to have discussions with atheists and have good back and forth, but like if you're trying to make a point, maybe don't link to the Heritage Foundation. I'm just saying. I mean, that's my opinion anyway.
Well, and I understand the criticism of bias, but I do have to be frank. I mean, bias exists everywhere, and it is a well-established fact at this point that the institutions at large are primarily on the liberal side of social issues. So I think like it's not the bias in and of itself. I certainly understand if you're skeptical of a source because of a bias, but you shouldn't dismiss sources out of hand because of a bias. If anything, just look into their evidence. I mean, everybody's biased, right?
Well,
you guys are clearly going to look at. Go ahead.
Well, no, you're right. You shouldn't just rule out everything they do because you see bias in some of what they do or most of what they do, however you want to define it. I mean, that's the same thing as a what is it when you say to the person that, well, you're wrong because you're this ad hom, I guess it's right. It's almost being an ad hom against like that foundation, but at any rate, okay. So the next thing I had here was when we were having the disagreement about what aboutism is, okay, and I think where the disconnect between the two of us is that, okay, you talked about what aboutism as it relates to the two quote K fallacy, but as I'm sure you would agree, the majority of words in our language and in other languages, even some idioms and phraseology within our language are polysemous. They have more than one meaning. Okay, a typical example, there's a difference between a scientific theory and the colloquial usage of the word theory. Okay, and what happened here, and I have the tweets that it came out of, and let me just refer to that real quick. So I had made the comment about Trump, comparing him to other, despots around the world. You took exception to that. Very understandable, given your worldview. And then we went back. We traded some verbal blows. I mean, all in fun. Nothing, no animosity on my part. It is long held. But you said, my comment's inane, and and I explained, well, no, it's not. And said something pretty bad at you. I mean, I admit it. I compared your belief system to believing in fairy tales. That was not cricket of me at all. But then you came back with me with this. You said, so, because I had commenting on Trump, and here I am in a public, forum bad-mouthing Trump and comparing him to a despot. I had said that were it not for our form of government, he'd be doing a lot worse right now. He would be doing the things like Xi and other despots do. And you said to me, so I guess you're probably scared shitless now that you've publicly criticized him on a massive internet platform. I said, what? Did I not say that Trump has been held in check from committing more heinous atrocities than he already has by the strength of our government? And then you went on to bring up some things that you disagreed that Obama had done during his presidency. And I can tell you right now, knock even the things you mentioned, knock didn't like that Obama did that. Okay, but when you talk about
and I didn't like it when he did it.
Right, yeah. And now when you talk about like the despotic actions of people like Xi and in other totalitarian countries, and what they do to their citizenry, and then you talk about what Obama did, which many people disagree with, but he didn't do anything that wasn't under the auspices of being commander in chief. Now you can talk about how immoral or how wrong it was because a lot of citizens died, a lot of collateral damage in what he did when he was doing that. But there's no comparison in that to a dictator, a totalitarian leader, just massacring their citizenry, imprisoning their citizenry, rounding up religious people, all things that she has done. And so I called you out. I said, wait a minute. Oh, why are you, what abouting about Obama? All right. Now here's where the disagreement came. I was accusing Trump that he could be as much of a despot as any other despot if it wasn't for our form of government. You brought up Obama saying he did this, this, and this. Our government didn't keep him from doing that. So it's not a whataboutism. And then you went on to explain whataboutism is tangential to the tu quoque fallacy. But whataboutism in reference to the tu quoque fallacy is that the hypocrisy fallacy is that if I what about you, it's on that specific topic. Like you say, you engage in this type of behavior. And I come back to you with, well, what about this that you're doing? In other words, trying to throw it back on you and accuse you of hypocrisy as if just because you engage in the behavior too, that your point is invalid. All right. But I was speaking of the colloquial sense. Whataboutism as it refers to more like in political discussions. All right. The colloquial use of whataboutism. And you definitely engage in that in my mind, because we were talking about despots and Trump's possible ability, by my estimation, that he could be as despotic as any of them if given the chance. And then you bring up Obama. That's that, like Leo said when we talked about it the other day, that's a red herring. That is the definition of whataboutism in that context. But go ahead.
Well, so I have personally never heard whataboutism used outside of the tu quoque fallacy unless it was being misused. So if that is something that I'm ignorant on, I will apologize on that.
Yeah. Well, here, hold on. I got something for that. Let me find it here.
I do know though, but like if you look this up though on like Merriam-Webster, Wikipedia, Google, right? And I use those because those are two pretty, a low source, kind of mid source in Google, and obviously Merriam-Webster, a much more respectable source. They do typically say it's considered to be a subsection of the tu quoque.
Well, no, but I'm granting that. You're absolutely right. But what I'm saying is that words are polysemous. They can have more than one meaning. Right. Did you ever look at the dictionary and look at the entry for the word it or if, little 2-letter words like that? It's like a foot long column. There's like so many different definitions of 2-letter words. Okay, whataboutism. And this is from the Oxford Dictionary, and not that dictionaries are necessarily dispositive of things. I mean, because of course dictionaries are descriptive, not prescriptive. And right. that's because words are polysemous. But here, whataboutism from the Oxford Dictionary: the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter accusation or raising a different issue. And so I say that that's what you did. You raised a different issue when we were talking about Trump and despotic rulers. So that is a valid definition of whataboutism in the context of having a discussion. It's not the definition of whataboutism as it relates to the tu quoque fallacy.
Well, and I think so. I would have to say a couple things. So I do think that is actually, even though it doesn't mention tu quoque, that does sound to me like it is actually trying to play off, although it does also sound a little bit like it's trying to play off of red herring. So I understand now where Leophilius would get that. With that said, the reason why I would say that this is not an example of that, and I would say this is the exact same thing actually that I had done with Rage when talking about, when using those examples, murder, rape, thievery, and all that. Although, like, there's, watch the beginning of this episode so you guys can see more about, nuance on that. But nonetheless, it was not something that was saying, what about this? Therefore, you're somehow invalid or logically moot or something like that. Well, my point was to say that if Obama is capable of doing X, Y, and Z, or Bush, by the way, you can totally pick on somebody who was supposed to represent the party that's supposed to represent me, right? I mean, the Patriot Act, Real ID Act, Iraq War, etc. I mean, Bush is it was one of the worst presidents we've ever had. The government did not actually have any sort of a problem with any of those things, even though some of them are clearly outside of the auspices of what the Constitution allows. For example, I'll give two examples to be fair to both parties: Obama drone striking American citizens and the USA Patriot Act for Bush, right? Because both of those definitely bypass the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, and with impunity.
I agree.
Right? So the government did nothing to stop those instances. So what I'm doing in bringing up those instances is trying to pose the question, what is it that makes you believe that the government would stop, for example, Trump poisoning Jim Acosta? I mean, it's one life, for crying out loud, and he could probably do it without anybody figuring it out. I mean, it's not.
I mean, what would stop him is because you're conflating two different things. Okay.
Well, real quick, John, just to cut in real quick, I do want to start winding down. I know CJ didn't have that awful long.
I just have one more topic after this.
So all right. So just to kind of like directing it in that course.
Yeah. See, because you can disagree with the outcome of what Obama did. You can disagree that he even did it, but he still did it under the auspices of being commander in chief within, the contents of his governmental power. Okay. And it still can be immoral. But what I'm talking about, when you and I were talking about Trump, I'm talking about the things that like leaders like Xi do, where they, slaughter citizens, where they imprison people, where they, try and control, what religion you're going to follow. I mean, that happens a lot in China. They don't want people to, believe in any kind of religion. And that's wrong. I'm an atheist, and I say that's wrong. So, I mean, that's where I see the distinction. But on this, we can just agree to disagree. I do want to get to this other topic because Knock wants to wrap it up, and we really need to talk about this one. And I got a couple.
Don't forget, John, Smokey starts streaming at 6:00.
Well, I can close it out if you need to go.
Well, no, continue. But I'm not sure if CJ is going over there. But I know he did say, like, I don't have too awful long. That's why we can't bring Leo in tonight.
It's not with him. I'm actually going to be on with Nicholas Whitmer.
Yeah. Nicholas is in the side chat. I'm going to talk to him next. I want to talk to him next.
So it's like 5:30 now. We can definitely be wrapped up, before 6:00. I mean,
finish your final point, John.
Yeah, we got to save just a couple minutes at the end, bring Leo in, and then you and him can decide when. And it's good to have your discussion. Gosh sakes.
If we're doing that, then make your last point quick.
Well, why? What do you mean? I'm saying that I told him in chat or said to him to come in like the last couple minutes of the stream.
All right. Well, yeah, that's fine. I'm just So let's make your last point and let's get there.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the Catholic point, right? No true Scotsman Catholics.
Right. And but I mean, it's going to take like 15, 20 minutes, Knock.
Well, here, let's go ahead and do this because I think Leophilius.
All right. If it's going to take that long, I say bring in Leo and maybe we can do this in a part 2 or something. I have 14 days off of work.
Yeah,
I did reach out to James.
I mean, we've only been going an hour and a half. I'd really like to get through this. I mean, in 10 or 15 minutes,
well,
Leo will be done. We'll be done by 10 to.
I'm down. All right, yeah, go for it, John. Go for it. I'm cool.
So, look, I just want to ask you a question. What methodology do you use to determine that your interpretation and the interpretations of your like-minded brethren are correct? What methodology do you use to say that your interpretation of the Bible is correct?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question, actually, because a lot of times, obviously, this is just, well, no, you're a heretic. No, you're a heretic, right? And everybody's a heretic hunter. So, in my opinion, now, first off, let's just go with what is the definition of the word Christian, right? A Christian. Now, you did say follower of Christ. and I do want to be clear, every dictionary I've seen says a follower of the teachings of Christ. Now, that is a very nitpicky thing for me to point out.
No, not at all. I would grant that premise, the teachings of Christ, because you still have the problem of interpretation. But go ahead.
Well, and I understand that, but what I would say on that is that in order to be considered, and actually, and I did end up eating crow a little bit yesterday because I did have to grant that Leo Filius was actually being more serious about the communist question than I thought he was. I don't know if you guys know, but obviously there's a lot of times when, people will just, well, they're not real communists, and that's the end of the conversation. And I sort of assumed that that's where Leo Filius was going. He actually is going to attempt to define Marxism in a way that would preclude, by its very definition, what I'm talking about, and I'm willing to hear that because that's obviously a different point. But in that, what is he pointing? Well, just because I'm a Democrat, just because I'm a Marxist, etc. Right? That doesn't mean that I'm actually legitimately a Democrat or a Marxist, so I'm not following or adhering to the teachings, right? And that would be my point with the definitions. Now, to get to your actual question, right? So how do you determine that? What's your methodology? So there is very few things. I'm actually pretty lenient on what I would consider to be outside of the faith. As a perfect example, I don't see Seventh-day Adventist, Hebrew roots, Oneness Pentecostals as outside of Christianity. There is not a single unambiguous verse that one can point to that says you must understand the Trinity in order to be saved. It does not exist. You can ask anybody on the planet. It just does not exist, right? However, there is clear and unambiguous passages and indeed entire books in the Bible that do absolutely preclude certain sects of what would be considered in the modern day Christianity. In the case of Catholicism, the book of Galatians, which if you are interested in understanding my perspective, I would advise you read, obviously not from the same perspective as me because you're not religious, but you would see where I'm coming from and why this is a key point of Christian theology. The book of Galatians' entire purpose, right? It's the sole argument of the book, is adding anything at all to the gospel message, which actually you rightfully defined, which is those who believe on the Lord Jesus Christ shall be saved, right? And by believe on the Lord Jesus Christ shall be saved, it means accept him as Lord, which is a position of authority, and repent and follow him as your savior, right? So it isn't just a name claim. There is actually some action in there, but it is a small amount of it, right? What Galatians points out is that to add anything at all, and I say anything at all because what the Galatians, the actual people, were adding was circumcision. Circumcision is in the Bible, right? But to even add something from earlier in the Bible to the gospel message, you are anathema, which is the Greek word meaning a curse, right? The entire reason there's a Protestant versus Catholic dispute is that issue, sola fide. Are you saved by faith alone or not? Catholics answer that question no, and if Galatians is actually teaching from Scripture, that precludes them from, and there are even more specific ones than that, by the way.
So in your interpretation of the Bible, are you saying that you rule out the entire Old Testament?
No. What I'm saying is
because didn't Jesus himself say that he has not come to abolish the old laws and that not a jot or a tittle?
Right. So there is a little bit of a misunderstanding there, and to be fair, you're not,
but you're saying there's a misunderstanding based on your interpretation, right?
No. So let me kind of explain the whole thing there, right? So what Paul is stating, and I have to reference Paul because Paul is the one who fleshes out this particular doctrine. What Paul states both in Galatians and also elsewhere in Romans and 2 Corinthians and so on, specifically Romans 1 and 2, 2 Corinthians 11 and 12, etc. What he is pointing out is that abolition of the law is not the same as not being under the law. And indeed, he actually uses the law to describe why he says it's a schoolmaster for us. So as a perfect example, Jesus says to even look upon another woman with lust is actually to commit adultery. And if you go back to Exodus, he says to commit adultery is to be worthy of the death penalty. So if you've ever looked at a chick's butt, you are worthy of the death penalty according to God. What's the point of that? The point is to draw on your necessity for a savior. It's not to condemn you to hell. It is actually to say, see, that's something that you all do. Therefore, this is why you need a savior. That doesn't also mean that it's right, though. That doesn't mean, okay, well, we all do it, so therefore I can just go gawk and objectify every woman I meet.
My apologies, but could you kind of wrap up your point? Because I want to move on because we only have a little bit of time.
Certainly. Yeah. So basically the idea is, right?
Hashtag normalize butt play.
The idea is that the law amplifies what sin is. Thus, you have a need for a savior. However, the gospel message is only that, and it's not anything else. And so if you add stuff to that, for example, you must be circumcised in order to be saved, or in the Catholic case, you must be under the auspices of the Catholic Church in order to be saved, then according to the book of Galatians, that makes you anathema.
I mean, I understand everything you're saying, but you're kind of dodging my question, because I didn't ask you what was in the Bible and what your interpretation was. And we can get past this because I have something else to say, but I asked you what your methodology is that you use so that you are assured that your interpretation is correct. And you really haven't answered that question. I mean, you just talk a whole lot about what was in the Bible. I mean, because here's the point I'm trying to make. There is, by some accounts, there's roughly 6 branches of Christianity in the world. Okay. In the United States alone, there's 200 denominations of Christianity. And when you claim that your denomination or your branch, your interpretation is the only right one, that is the epitome of the no true Scotsman fallacy. Because here's the thing, and you said something similar yourself. I mean, a Christian is a person who believes in Christ, who believes that Christ is their Lord and Savior. That's the baseline definition. Anything after that is dogmatic interpretation. And that's what you're doing when you say Catholics are not really Christians. That's the epitome of the no true Scotsman fallacy, because they believe Christ is their Lord and Savior. And you want to nitpick at people's interpretations, which you have every right to disagree with. But there's no sure way that you can know how you interpret is correct, because A, you are not Jesus Christ himself. You don't have Jesus Christ in DMs. You don't meet Jesus Christ every Tuesday for coffee. Okay. So I understand your confidence in your interpretation, but every Christian is confident in their interpretation. So you would need some methodology, and that doesn't include your interpretation of the Bible, which is what you were kind of pontificating on here for a few minutes. What I'm saying is, what's the methodology wherein you know your interpretation is absolutely the right interpretation? And I say it's impossible for you to know that, because you would have to ask Jesus that, and I would hazard a guess that you've never conversed with Jesus.
Well, so, and there's, I guess, a couple things I would want to say there. So the first thing, I would not say that only people who believe like me are Christian. There's a lot of room for disagreement in my view. In fact, I am probably I'm sorry, half of Christendom. You have said that over half of Christendom are not Christian. Well, right. If you use that in as far as the gross population, that's true. But if you use that as far as like the actual sects, which it seemed like you were discussing there, like I don't think being a Baptist precludes you from being a Christian. I am anti-denominational, and that is for a different reason. But that does not necessarily mean that every denomination has what would be considered to be
Catholics, the largest section of Christendom, Seventh-day Adventists. You don't think they're Christians?
No, I think Seventh-day Adventists are.
I don't think Catholicism is the largest anymore. I could be wrong, John. But I do think something else overtook it. I'm just not quite sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, and maybe it's just a plurality and not the majority. But I absolutely believe it's a plurality. So
let me kind of explain a couple of things, right? So I think the first thing that needs to be pointed out is the methodology that I did just explain. To be fair, that was the methodology for how I determined Catholics are heretical, not how I know mine is correct. So I'll grant that, and I'll answer that in just a second. However, that does need to be noted, right? If, just like Leophilius was saying, if within the Communist Manifesto there is something that absolutely precludes certain actions, then people who are using those actions as a form of dogma in their particular ism, right, that's departing from the source material. I mean, that's just a fact, right? And that is, every Catholic would agree with me in the sense that sola fide, i.e., is faith alone what saves you, right? They would say that's not true. Every Protestant would say that is true, right? The vast majority of Orthodox would also say that's true. Fun fact. So that Galatians very clearly is stating that sola fide is the correct doctrine, and therefore they are very clearly going against the teachings and therefore not followers of the teachings. But in that, you do actually get a little bit of an inkling as to what my method is, which is just simply a straightforward and plain reading of the text. That is my methodology.
But here's the thing, okay? You're not seeing my point. You still must interpret it, and everybody can interpret it in different ways. I mean, it's just like, it's like, well, but here's the thing, because Knock takes a lot of heat, maybe not from you, but from other Christians, from Smokey certainly, about the Bible is Stupid series, because he's claiming, well, you don't know how to interpret the Bible. And he is interpreting the Bible in the exact manner that you just mentioned. A simple reading of the Bible, going by the words that are right there in the Bible. And you guys say
it is what my Bible is Stupid series is designed to do, is to look at the words and comment on them.
Look, I want to get you together with Leo real quick before we close out.
I just need to say one quick thing.
I'm going to let you, but let me say in closing, and then you can have the final word on this. Because of the problem I bring up that you certainly don't agree with, that first of all, the baseline definition of a Christian is someone who calls Jesus Christ his Lord and Savior. That if you say that another person is a Christian, is not a Christian, that claims to be a Christian, that claims that Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior, and you base that on your interpretations of the Bible, unless you have that methodology to where you can know without a doubt that you're right, that is the epitome of the no true Scotsman fallacy. I mean, because I understand what your argument was, like, you know, if somebody claims to be something like, claiming to be like a police officer or something, and they're not, that it wouldn't be wrong to call them out on that. But you're talking about these esoteric things of believing in a supernatural being and following the dogma, your interpretation of the dogma in this like old book that really doesn't speak very clearly in most spots. And you're basing that's what you're basing your idea that, well, those Christians aren't really Christians. And
well,
so I think, and this is my final word. I think you absolutely engaged in no true Scotsman fallacy when you say Catholics or other people are not Christians. But go ahead, you get the final word.
Well, so the thing that I would say that it's interesting, and I would advise two things. Number one, if you feel that it's something that would interest you, read the book of Galatians, because you will see that it is as plain as could possibly be plain. If language means anything, if it is true that Leo Filius has a point, that Marxism defines certain things clearly, and that therefore being outside of those things is being outside of Marxism, the same would be true of any other ism. Christianism, I guess, Christianity, right? But nonetheless, and if you read the book of Galatians, I promise you, John Peterson, you will come to my conclusion, because my point number two.
I've read the entire Bible a few times.
Well, and just do it again specifically, right? But here's my second point, though, and the reason why I promise you will come to the same conclusion as me. The Catholic Church comes to the same conclusion as me, right? The Catholic Church actually has a belief that you cannot take a plain reading of Scripture because you need to have the specific interpretation of Rome, right? So they actually plainly agree that you cannot have a straightforward interpretation of the Scripture and come to the conclusions. And you can ask Catholics about this, by the way. You can plainly ask Catholics about this. They believe in the doctrines of the supremacy of the Catholic Church, papal supremacy, and papal infallibility, right? Those are actual on-the-books Catholic doctrines.
Real quick, let me say, Leo, I just put the link in the chat there if you want to pop in here. Go ahead.
Well, and so just to say, right, when I say that I use the interpretation of a plain, straightforward reading of Scripture to determine that they are heretical, the interesting thing is about that, and again, I do advise you both read Galatians and ask Catholics. They agree with me in everything except for, therefore, they're heretical.
Well, I said you could have the final word, but when you spoke, I thought something else I wanted to say or question is like, so if the Bible is so plain to
11 minutes and counting, John.
Yeah, I know. So if the Bible is so plain to read, and it doesn't look like Leo's coming in, I don't see him yet. He might have had to leave for some reason, but well, guys can just DM.
We can work it out offline. We will make it happen on this channel or another. It'll happen.
But if the Bible is written so plainly and discernible, for people to understand why is there 6 branches of Christianity and 200 denominations alone in this nation.
Nitpicky issues. Honestly, I mean, I'm being 100% straightforward. The vast majority of denominations agree on the things that I am talking about. So I'll give you a perfect example, right? All Calvinist denominations, which there is splits even within Calvinism, all Calvinist denominations, their disagreement is the issue of predestination versus free will, which is not even remotely close to the actual message of the gospel. It is a peripheral dogma, right? According to virtually everybody. So in other words, the Calvinists, not only within their own personal splits, but also with the Arminian, who would believe in something more akin to like straightforward free will, right? They actually agree on the dogmas that I'm referring to today. The vast majority of Christians do. The only ones who don't, I could actually name for you. They are some of the obvious ones, right? Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. The Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and very specific sections of certain Protestant organizations. For example, the Oneness Pentecostal Church, not necessarily Oneness Pentecostalism, but the Oneness Pentecostal Church does definitively say you must actually live a holiness code in order to be saved, right? Which would be another perfect example of the Galatian heresy. But so you see what I'm saying, though? Like, there is 200 sects, but 195 of them agree on these issues. There is 6 major branches, but 4 of them agree on these issues. And actually, you can even kind of extend that because the Orthodox are kind of split 50-50. There's a lot of Orthodox.
I'm going to stop you there and just say that we can have a discussion on this again. Knock wants to get out of here,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I have a programming note to let folks know about. So this week is I keep forgetting, 3rd or 4th installment of the Women of Atheism Roundtable. The theme is women atheists from down under, either are living in Australia now, or I believe one of the panelists is actually an expatriate that was born and raised in Australia but lives elsewhere now. We had to play around with it because people had commitments, work commitments and whatever, and I was trying to do it in the evening on our end, which would have been the mid-morning for them in Australia, but now we're doing it the other way around. It will be 10 or 11:30 for them at night on Saturday, which equates to 12:30 or 1 o'clock tomorrow. So it'll be a little earlier showing of that. But and then of course on Sunday the Apostate Alliance 11 a.m. Eastern time. I'm sure Knock wants to close the show up, but is there anything that you need folks to know about? Like, you got a YouTube channel or anything like that?
Well, if anyone's interested, certainly check out the Synagogue. I do apologetics work, and I have not done anything on politics in a very long time, but I promise I will have it up at least next week. Because the election's coming up, and I have to talk about Amy Coney Barrett, and I have to talk about the Abraham Accords, and there's so much I have missed. So,
well, and I got to go through
research the party switch.
As we promised, we're going to get everybody's channels in the description from last night's stream, and while I'm doing that, I'll get your channel in the description for today. So go ahead, take it away, Knock.
Oh, my fucking camera is not working. I don't know what's going on with that bullshit. But okay. So me and CJ, hopefully soon, are going to be on Modern Day Debate, debating, did the party switch up during civil rights? And it's going to be great. And I can't wait for it. CJ, you're a great person to have debates with. We're gonna have to have a lot of conversations, my dude. When you have time, when I have time, to flesh out some of the bigotries within your religion and some of the bigotries within your worldview. And I will let you flesh out some of the bigotries within mine. I think that's only fair.
I got to tell you, Doc, I am so fucking jealous of you having that debate with him, because you know how much I know about that shit.
I know, like John is itching. He's like, Knock, let me tell you about this. So I just want to say, CJ, you come here and you face the fire, right? Like you aren't scared. I like earlier I was afraid that you wouldn't show because we had the conversation last night. It devolved into what it devolved into, right? So, and then like when Smokey did put me backstage, I just went to bed. I was like, fuck it.
Right.
So but I want to thank you for coming here, for facing the fire, for answering my questions. And I think we could have definitely delved deeper, but I wanted to give you and John a chance to really flesh out some of the issues I've noticed on Twitter between the two. Because one thing I do know about John is he likes to have conversation. And it's very rare when we get really good people like you, CJ, that will answer the questions.
Well, and
Whether we like the answers or not, you answer the questions.
Well, and I just want to say too, real quick. I have so much respect for you, even though I disagree with you on most things. I have so much respect for you for being respectful and reasonable when we have these conversations, because you deal with these conversations and the debates I've seen you do. You do them justice because you are such an honest interlocutor. You are such a reasonable interlocutor. You don't fall back on ad homs and insults. And,
you're no Smokey Saint. You're no Smokey Saint.
Yeah,
CJ. You are yourself. Yeah.
I could have just said that, and that would have been saying all that. So yeah.
Well, and I do greatly appreciate all that also. And by the way, just for the record, if it means anything, I do know that, like, the way that you guys treat me does communicate that feeling towards me. So I appreciate that also. I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, me and Rage have even had some conversations off of air before. I mean, it's not much, but still, you know what I mean? It's a little bit.
I'm trying to actually get better at that again and be on Discord more. So if you're on Discord, CJ, I'm going to try to have a bigger presence on that social media again.
Well, and one thing that I will say too is I do think, everybody talks a lot about, and this will be sort of the thing I end on, because I think the relationships that I've been cultivating here, even though they're obviously not like I said, they're all online, obviously, and in the course of these conversations, but whether it's with you guys or with Leophilius or with Skylar Fiction or being on Digital Gnosis, right? Like, there is a very specific thing that we're starting to see going on, which is the ability to actually talk about these issues. I mean, a lot of times, how many times have you said something, I said something, we pissed each other off, came into a stream and said verbatim the same thing, but it was clarified, right? And
but so I still have respect for you. I think that you picked that up earlier when I tagged you in Ethan's thing on Facebook. And I'm not sure if you know who Ethan is. He's your friendly neighborhood atheist. Great dude. Takes a 180-degree different approach than I do. I respect him for it. He respects me for my approach. And I think that you guys would have a very interesting political conversation because I respect you, CJ. I don't agree with you, but I respect you.
And likewise. And I think this is the way that not only issues get fleshed out, but I would also argue it's the way that you actually eliminate animosity. I am a firm believer that the motto that everybody has of you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics, right? That is precisely the reason that we are in such a polarized situation, in my opinion. So I love having conversations like this. They reduce the hatred. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree. I wish I could have these conversations with my dad. I really do. Like with my dad, I want to be able to talk with him like I talk with you about politics, right? Because I can say, hey, fascism. And Smokey will go off on a fucking tirade, but you, I think, understand where I'm coming from, and we can have a conversation instead of just back and forth.
Wait. You said you wish you could have these conversations with your dad, and then you mentioned Smokey. Is Smokey your dad now?
Smokey could be my dad if he had bigger arms.
Aren't you and Smokey like the same age though? Like that mathematically would not
No,
work.
Smokey is 37. I am old, my dude. I am like 43, I think, something like that.
Real quick, CJ, I have this theory that if Smokey got lost in the woods, that he could just rub his arms together really, really quick and start a fire.
All right. We are going to get out of here. We're 1 minute away from Smokey stream. I know, CJ, you've got other shit to do. Thank you for coming on. Thank you. And as always, my audience, as I pull up my fucking Patreon screen, that I just realized today somehow I erased the new Patreon screen instead of the old Patreon screen. And I've been using the old Patreon screen on both OBS and StreamYard because I erased the new one instead of the old one. So my bad, new patrons. I love you guys. I really fucking do. All right, so God, I can't even pull it up. My shit is not working for some
Shit's
reason.
frozen or something, huh?
It's just not working. My camera's not working. My share screen isn't working. I don't know what's going on, but I know we're gonna leave. So be the conversation. Y'all have a great night. And Smokey is live. Maybe right now. He's usually late because he's an icky taint. Peace.